we're going to do all of this from an environment off the host. But all of our work is being done on the host. And what do I mean by that? All right, so let me just, I'm going to open a little script called Hello World. Let's change this so it says something else different today. What is today? It's October 30th. And so this is a legitimate piece of JavaScript that I've just created. And I can test this piece of JavaScript. By the way, the environment I'm in, I should explain a little bit. This is Eclipse, and it's standard Eclipse. The standard windows here you see for Eclipse for different things. This window down here is a little different. And there's a couple other windows down here that are a little different as well. But this is basically Eclipse with a HostBridge plugin that allows me to talk to the host. Allows me to talk to HostBridge running in the host. Now, with this legitimate piece of JavaScript I've written here, I can right mouse click in this window and say execute, and it will take that piece of JavaScript, send it to the host, it will syntax check it, compile it, and execute it, and send the results of that execution back here. Now, this actually ran on the host inside CICS. If I do a right mouse click here and I say make, it's going to take this piece of JavaScript, send it to the host, compile it, syntax check it, and it's going to save it in the host. So this is now actually a callable web service on the host. Now, it's not a very good one because it's not XML, it's not JSON, it's not obeying a lot of the rules. But as far as being a deployed service, it's out there. And I can actually call that by coming over here and just saying demo, like that. That's a deployed service. That ran out of my host. Now, as we go through some of these scripts and we write some of these scripts, this URL here is actually live to the outside world. You will get slightly different results than I get because the authentication where it's being used for this outside is not my user ID and password, which I'm going to be using for most of the demonstration. So the results, when we actually get into the data and pulling data, will be slightly different. But you'll actually be able to run the same services that I'm invoking from your desktop if you want to open a browser and go there. And if you can't read that, that's demo.hostbridge.com/hbscript/ and this would be the service name. Right now the service name is demo, but I'm going to change that as we write our services. All right. So it's very easy then to write scripts, to test scripts, and deploy scripts. You can do it with a simple mouse click. And there's lots of different ways we can test it. One of them is right inside of this, and I'm going to show you some others as we go along as well. But let's get into starting to actually write our web service. So I'm going to create a new file. We're going to call this live demo.hbx. And I'm starting with a clean sheet, guys. There's a lot of this code that I probably, if I was at a customer site writing this, that I would probably copy from someplace else, but I'm going to develop this from the ground up. And so much of this would be a template, and you wouldn't have to write it fresh each time. And you'll see that as we go along the kinds of things I'm talking about. The first thing I like to do is I like to capture the time, because that means that at the end of this, I can and if I have to stop talking while I type, it's because I can't walk and chew gum at the same time. So every once in a while, you'll see me stop typing because I have to talk. I want to get the time, and I'm going to get the time in microseconds. And we wrap inside the JavaScript engine. By the way, it's a port of Firefox. Is what's running inside CICS, a port of the JavaScript engine from Firefox. As you see me write some of this stuff, we've extended that JavaScript with our own HostBridge objects. Now, all the JavaScript you expect to be there is there, all the server-side JavaScript. So you're able to interact with JavaScript the same way you would on any other platform. In fact, very often I cut and paste JavaScript off the net to be able to accomplish various things. Now the client-side JavaScript's there. I mean, you're not going to be manipulating stuff in a browser because there's no browser here. This is server-side JavaScript. So, but all the JavaScript's there. So all the try, catches, the else and the ifs, and all the conditionals you'd expect to be there are just like you would be in any other JavaScript engine. All right, so I've got the time. I want to save that off because at the end of this, I'm going to report on how long my service is taking to run. Now, I also want to set up addressability to base HostBridge. And base HostBridge is the product that allows us to talk to scripts. To talk to services, to talk to the host transactions. So with this, I'll be able to again, I got to quit talking sometimes. With this, I'll be able to call a base host bridge, which allows me to exercise transactions, call programs, and other things. So now with this, I've got addressability to that object. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of depth on some of these things, but I just want to get the concepts. The next thing I want to do is I want to pull in a couple of pre-written packages of JavaScript. Now, this is stuff that we distribute to all of our customers. It's available both in compiled and source form, so the customers can see exactly what we're doing in this JavaScript. This JavaScript allows us to do things like debugging or common things we do like padding fields on the left or padding fields on the right. In JavaScript, in a typical JavaScript implementation, you don't do that a lot. But when you're dealing with the host and you're dealing with screens, very often you have to pad fields out to be certain width, or you got to zero fill fields, or you got to insert commas or remove commas, because these things are expected on certain screens. So we've written a bunch of utilities that we reuse over and over again and we distribute with the product that allow you to do a lot of those things. So I'm going to pull in this package called Common, and I'm pulling it out of a repository. And a repository is nothing more than a vsem file where we've compiled our scripts to. And I'm going to pull in debugging. It's another package that has a bunch of common functions that I use all the time. Now, as part of the functions that are in there, I'm going to actually call one of them now to common, and it's going to add certain abilities that aren't normally part of my HB object over here. So what I'm actually doing is I'm modifying my host bridge object with some additional stuff. Now, what this allows me to do, it's going to allow me to check to make sure that I'm on the right screen and other defensive checks as I run this. Now, it's not built into the HB object. I actually extend the HB object with these additional features because different customers might want to do it differently than how I've chosen to do it. And customers can build their own packages and their own routines so that they can have the same output that they expect to have each time, or maybe they want to do the same defensive checks over and over again, or maybe their applications behave in a certain predictable way so they can write some routines they can reuse over and over again to check messages and check for errors on screen, those types of things. So I'm pulling in a package that's going to help me do that so that I don't have to do that by hand. Do some of those defensive checks. And I'm also going to pull in a debugging module that helps me debug issues that I might run into. Or if I want to produce debug output. So with that, at this point now, I've kind of got the beginning of my shell. Now, I always have 3 functions that I always create in every script that I write. This isn't necessary. This is just how I choose to write my JavaScript. You're going to develop your own styles internally, your own procedures, your own best practices. But this is how I do it. I always have an initialize, and then I have a terminate, and I have a main. And I want to call my main routine. Now, at any time in this process, I can actually run my script to see if I've created any errors. Now, at this point, I'm not doing any output, so I don't expect any output, but it will tell me if I've created any syntax errors in my JavaScript. So I run this. There's no output whatsoever. I'm going to add a little so that I can do this. Oh, I guess I do need to call initialize and terminate in my main routine. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and run this. And now I get it done back. So this tells me there's no syntax errors, and I've got the ability to access or able to run my script without any errors. All right, so far so good. But I haven't done anything with the host yet. I mean, this is running inside CICS, but I'm not interactive with any transactions yet. And I'm going to save that for a little while before we do that. But we're going to get there. So how do I want my output to look? Now, if we go back to the screen over here again, the data that I want is primarily all on this screen right here. What information do I want to collect, and how do I want it to look when it's done? I'm going to pull this to the side And I probably will pull it to the side where you can't see it. Yeah, because I have to make this too small. There we go. So what do I want over here in my output? Well, I'm going to create a JavaScript object that basically shows me what I want in my output. So I'm going to create a JavaScript object called response. And in that object, I'm going to have various elements. If I'm going to go through and get the quote information for each one of my stocks, it's really more than quote. It's really my holdings. I need to do this for each one of my stocks. So I'm going to have an array of stock information I'm going to turn back. So I'm just going to create something called quotes here. And I'm going to make it an array. Okay, so that's one of my pieces of output that I'm going to return. I also want to know the status of how did my web service run. Did it run successfully? How long did it take to run? How many transactions did I execute? Were there any errors? I want to know all that stuff. I'm going to create another object inside my response object called status, and it's going to have several things in it. I'm going to have a success. It's just going to be a true-false Boolean that will tell me, did this run correctly or not? That way I've only got one place I have to check when my response comes back that says, did this run okay? And I want to have a count of my transactions I ran. And I'm going to set that to 0 to start with. And elapsed time, I'm going to set that to 0, and errors. And I'm going to make that an array because I could have more than one error, and I want to capture them all. All right, so that's basically what I'm going to be returning. Now, I can go ahead and let's return this now. Let's not wait until I've got my data. Let's go ahead and return this and write this information out now. I can get rid of my done then because I'll be producing output. And I'm going to put this in terminate. So I'm going to say write line. Now, I've got to decide how I want to return this data. Do I want to return it as XML or do I want to return it as JSON? Well, I want to return it as either one. I want to be able to return it as JSON if the requester says they want a JSON response, and I want to return it as XML if they say they want an XML response. So we're going to do this in such a way where the user, at the time the request is made, can choose how they want the data to come back, JSON or XML. And you can have other options as well. So let's see. So I'm going to do, well, let's do the XML one first. So I'm going to put a header out that says this is XML. Now, when I say header, this is an HTTP header. I don't want to get too technical for the people who aren't familiar with it, but this is the way you tell the outside world what style my response is going to be in. So I'm telling the outside world my response is going to be XML. So now I want to do a write line, and I want to do a write line on response, but I want to turn it into XML. And I have a routine in common that writes out my JavaScript object as XML. So I put response there, and I have to put the outer tag for the XML because there's no outer tag for response. Now I could just call it response, but I'm going to call it getQuote. All right, so we'll save the JSON for just a second. Let's test what we have here. Let's see what it looks like. So I'm going to execute this just as is, and here I've got XML. Now, I don't have anything in errors, and I don't have anything in quotes. Both those are empty, but there it is. I've just produced output. Now, I really need to start running this in some other environment besides here in Eclipse, because Eclipse doesn't do the best at rendering XML and JSON, and it won't tell me if there might be construction errors in it or if I've got something wrong. I really need to move to another environment to do my testing. So I'm going to do a make on my script. Now, when I do a make, my script is compiled, and it's saved in the host, in a vsam file. And I now can call this live demo from back over here like this. So let's put in live demo. And now this is the spot where you guys can actually run the same thing I'm running if you want to run that. And that will be the service we run from now on, so you'll be able to get that. So it is coming back as XML. It's being treated the right way. But how do I switch between XML and JSON? I've got to do something here that allows me to do that. Well, we'll put an if block in place. I'm going to say if, and I have to create something that's going to be able to allow me to say whether I want this as XML or JSON. I'm going to put that in, pass it in as input, and I'm going to have a variable in my input called type. If type equal XML, then we'll do this. If it's not, if they don't explicitly say they want XML, I'm going to do JSON. So now I put my JSON in here. And again, I have another service or another package in my another function in my package that lets me do that. All right, so with this, it will produce JSON output. And since the default is now JSON, because it's only going to be this if input type is equal to XML. In fact, input type doesn't exist, so it's going to be mad at me about that. So let me go ahead and create input first as a global variable. I don't like global variables in general, but for our purposes, we're going to make use of it. So I think this will work. So let's do a make on this. And we're going to run it again. And it's XML here, so if I refresh it, I can now get JSON. So we have to pass in that parameter that's going to say whether this is JSON or this. So I want to pass that parameter in on the URL query string. Actually, that should be a question mark. Farrell, is there a question?
No, but we can unmute. I did unmute the phones in case someone does want to have a question or comment.
Any questions? Okay, you guys are being nice to me so far. All right, so I've got to get that input from someplace. So I've created this global variable called input, and in my initialize function, I'm going to get that value from let's do it this way. Let's say input.type equals, and I can get this information from my HB request. And HB request, how do I know about HB request? Well, everything in the JavaScript engine is documented. So I can come over to my wiki and see about how do I get data from a URL query string. And I've obviously already pulled this up. But what I'm going to use is this HB request HTTP get value. Now, I can also get data from a post or a put by using this field name. I can know what method was used to talk to me, whether it's a get, post, put, whatever, or delete, whatever it might be. I can also get the entire query string if I want to. But I'm just going to get one value off the query string. So I'm going to use this function down here. So up here in my input on type, I'm going to say type equals HB request.http.get value, and the value I'm getting is type, like that. Okay, so with this, it's going to get that, and it does it when I call initialize, so that happens before terminate. So I should now be able to change between either XML or JSON just by changing this value. So let's make this again. Go over to this, and let's change this. Well, it says XML already, so let's hit enter. There's XML, JSON. I can switch between the two. And if I wanted to, I could actually switch between the two for input as well. Right now, I'm going to pass all my input in on the query string. But I could use an HTTP header that says whether my input is XML or JSON or query string, so that I can pass data in whatever form it makes sense and just set a flag on an HTTP header so that my service understands where it's supposed to get the data from. So you can write a universal service that's good for XML, JSON, or whatever style you choose to write your web services in. All right. So far, so good. I now can output input. I can output my response in whatever form I choose. And one of the things I wanted to be able to do is I want to echo my input into my output, and I didn't do that up above here. I'm going to add another. I'm going to add another field up here. Oops. Sorry. Let me try that again. I'm going to add another field up here called input. And I'm just going to set it equal to an object like this. And then down here, after I've retrieved my input, I'm simply going to add that to my response. So that's going to be response dot status dot input equals input. So I'm setting response.status.input equal to whatever value I have here in input. And I'm doing this in the wrong place. Some of you were probably saying, he's doing it wrong. That's where I should be doing it after I get my input. All right. So with that, I can echo my input back on my response so that I can actually see what I sent in. So let's make this again real quick and run it again just so we can see that. And so there's my input, and you can see that I'm passing in type as JSON. All right, rock on. Okay, so what do we need to do next? I think we're almost at the point where we actually need to fire up a transaction and start running a transaction. Let's look at it real careful here. Oh, we didn't put our elapsed time in our response over here, so let's do that real quick. So input.status.time equals we want to do the same call here to get the current time. And since the current time will be greater than the starting time, I'm going to subtract start time like this. And with that, I now have elapsed time. We also want to get the transaction count equals hb.tran count, because that's where we keep track of the tran count. Let's make this again and run it. Oh, input status is undefined. I mistyped something. Let's go back and see what I did. Of course it's undefined. It's not supposed to be input status. It's supposed to be response status. Thus, you guys really know this is live. Let's make it again. And go back and test it again. Okay. So there's our elapsed time. There's our tran count. Now remember, this is in microseconds. It's not in milliseconds. So that was 9 milliseconds. And the platform we're running on is an emulated Z system running on Intel hardware. So it's not very big. It's pretty small. All right. So I've got those two things. What else do I have in status that I might need? I can't set success, tran count, errors, input. I think we're okay. All right. So now it's time to fire up a transaction. And we do that by running base host bridge and talking to base host bridge. And we're going to do that by using this HB object here. So over here in initialize, after I've got my after I've retrieved my input, I'm going to go ahead and start my transaction. I'm going to say HB set HB_tran ID, and I'm going to set this to trad. Now, trad is exactly the same thing I typed in on the screen over here when I wanted to start my transaction. If you remember, trad is how I start my transaction. So I'm starting my transaction with that statement. Well, actually, I'm preparing to start the transaction. It doesn't actually run until I do an HB run. And I want to send in an enter key. So I'm going to say HB_AID equals enter. And now, after that run statement, I have a session in flight on my host. It's there, it's available, and I can now interact with that session. It's visible by doing a CMTI if you're on the system. But this session is going to only last milliseconds because it only lasts as long as the web service lasts. The session is going to fire it up. I'm going to interact with it, and the session is going to tear down at the end of my service. So it's going to come in and go out and be gone in milliseconds. Okay, so I fired up my transaction. I now have a transaction in flight, and I'm sitting on this screen here. Well, the next thing I need to do is I need to start navigating through some of this to be able to get to the next screen. This is the screen I'm on right now, but I want to navigate through this. Now, how do I do that? Well, first off, how do I even know I'm on this screen? From a debugging perspective, how can I tell where I'm really at? Well, because we added this control debug check up here, I've already got debugging built into my script. So let's make this like this, and let's go over to our web browser again, and I'm going to go over to service test. And on service test here, I'm going to change the service name that's currently listed to be live demo. And you can see I've got debug on, and now I need to still go ahead and add my ampersand type equals XML if I want my output to be XML. But with this debug on, when I send my request, I still get my response back here, but I also got back some debug data. If I go over here and look at this, this is the debug data that was generated because I said debug on. Now, this debug on was recognized because I have the information. I have the information in here that allows me to go back over here. Because I have this, it recognizes the debug on and automatically generates the debug data. Automatically. I didn't have to do anything special to do that. So I run it again. There it is. And inside my debug, I can see exactly what screen I'm on. I can see everything that I sent into the host. And when I start navigating through it, I'll be able to see everything else as I walk through these screens. So let's go back and to our script. So now I can debug as I walk through. I know I'm on the right screen because I've actually seen it in my debug output because debug is turned on. And I now need to walk through that. Well, to walk through that, I just finished initialize, so my transaction is in flight. So now I need to start filling in fields. So how do I know what the fields are? Well, of course, we have tooling that allows me to do that. Let's go down here to Application Explorer. This is part of the HostBridge plugin. And again, it connects to my host so that I can interact with it. Now, when I hit Enter here, it launches my transaction. And this looks just like the terminal I was looking at over here. But it's not. There's no 3270 session here. What's actually happening is I am talking to HostBridge running inside CICS. And HostBridge is sending back an XML document. Actually, it's this XML document below here. And inside this XML document is enough information that my Eclipse plugin can recreate exactly what the screen looks like. So down here, it has all the attributes, it has all the field colors, it has all the information necessary for my Eclipse plugin to recreate this screen. Not only does it have the ability to recreate the screen, but I know what fields are on the screen now, because base HostBridge can actually get that information out of the metadata that's associated with the transaction. So here are the fields that are on this screen. I can click on the field like Comp1, and I can see, well, that's the company name for number 1. Comp2, Comp3, Comp4. Option, this is the field I need to fill in to select what company I'm going to select. And then down here, there's a MES2 field. Well, this is empty. There's nothing here. But this is a message field that the application writes back error messages. If I were to pick like an incorrect company or something like that, the message would come back here. So what I need to do is I need to fill in option with 1 so that I can navigate to the next screen. Because if I type that and hit enter, it takes me to the next screen. Now, this Application Explorer, I can walk through all my screens and hit the same PF keys as I would on a terminal. it records and saves all of this information about my session. If I'm working with a customer and I'm writing services for them, the first thing I do is I have a domain expert. Very often it's an operator or somebody who deals with the application every single day, sit down with me and we walk through the application and we create the error cases and the success cases and everything that they do as part of whatever business process that I'm going to wrap. They understand the application better than the people that wrote it very often. At least they understand how the application works. Maybe not what goes behind the scenes, but how the application works in front of glass. So we sit down, we walk through those processes, and when we're done, they're able to go back to their desk, and I save this entire session, and I can then replay this session as often as I want to be able to understand exactly what I walk through, what all the field names are that are on the screen, and exactly what I filled in as I walk through the screens. All the information is here. So I've got a recorded session that will allow me, that will help me write my service. And we are adding new functionality to this so that you'll be able to drag from this screen over into here and drop the field in. So what I'm getting ready to type, you won't have to do. It will automatically just populate that information in for those. But for right now, I'm going to take this and I'm going to split my screen, which makes this really small. Let me do this a different way. Let me maximize this first. Then I'm going to split my screen to the side. Now it's not quite so bad. All right. So now I need to fill in these fields on the screen, and I'm going to do that by saying HB set. The field I want to fill in is option. And right now I'm going to hard code a 1 in here. We're going to fix this so it's variable in a minute, but right now I'm going to hard code it. And I'm going to say HB run, HB underscore AID equals enter. And with that, it's going to navigate to the next screen. Well, I know that next screen is this screen. Well, what do I do on this screen? Well, I want real-time quote, so I'm going to put a 1 in the field called opt2. So right here I'm going to say HB set opt2 equals 1, and HB run, HB underscore AID equals enter. Now, what happens, though, if I'm not on the right screen? What happens if I screw something up here and I don't end up the right screen? Or if there's an error and I end up someplace other than what I expect? I'm not doing any defensive checks here. None. But I can. I just haven't up to this point. I could write all sorts of code after this that checks to see if I'm on what screen I'm on and those types of things. But I've also, as part of this package I pulled in here, it's doing some defensive checks for me. If I get in a bin or an invalid response, this is automatically going to throw an error, and it's going to catch that. But if I end up on a different screen, that's not something it knows that I'm on a different screen. But I know what screen I'm on over here. So if I go back over here, let's go back to the first screen. Down here, and you're probably not going to be able to read this, it's going to be too small, but down here at the bottom of on my status bar of Eclipse, it actually tells me the map set and the map I'm currently on here. So this is map T002. I can simply add T002 to this, and it will then do a check to make sure that I'm on the right screen. If it doesn't match T002, then I know that I failed. Actually, I just did this wrong. This is going to throw an error because after I hit enter on this, I actually end up on T003, which is this screen. So this is going to throw an error. Well, let's just go ahead and run this and see what the error looks like. So I'm going to do a make on this. And I'm going to go back over here, and I'm going to clear, and I'm going to run this. And it didn't get back XML, so let's just go back to formatted text. So I got back just this text. Now, one thing I don't want to happen inside my web service is if I get an error, I don't want to throw standard text out. I still want to throw XML or JSON. So I don't want this to show up this way. So we have to go back and fix that. If an error gets thrown, I need to handle it in some way or another. So what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to put a try catch around this entire block. I'm going to say try this, and everybody who's ever worked with me knows I have to have proper indentation before I can continue. I'm going to do a catch here. I'm just going to catch the error as E, And then what I'm going to do, what am I going to do with this? Well, I want to stuff this. I want to stuff whatever errors I get into this errors section up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say response dot status dot errors dot push e. Now, since errors was an array, I declared it up here as an array, right? Errors is an array. Push is a function of arrays. I'm going to push this error into my error response. So I'm not going to fix this error yet. I'm just going to, one other thing I want to do is I always want to call terminate. No matter what happens, I always want to call terminate. So I'm going to do a finally, which is part of your try-catch, that says this statement is always executed even if an error occurs. So let's run this again. I'm going to do a make on this. And it builds successfully. And let's clear it and run it again. And this time I got back XML, even though an error occurred. Expected map T002, but received map 003. And here's all the elements that are part of that. And if I were to have more error messages, they would all appear here inside my errors element. Very cool. But now I'm still saying success is equal to true. Well, that's bogus. Let me go back over here, and in my catch, let's do response status success equals false. It failed. All right. Let's fix this and move on. Okay, so this really is not T00. This is T003. And I bet you, if we scroll up here to this, this is going to be T002. And while we're at it, we might as well go ahead and fill this one in, which is our last screen, which is this screen. And, of course, it's T004. So all right, with that, I've now done some simple additional checks. Now, there might be other checks I need to check on. There might be things that I need to look like as far like the message and other things. But we're not going to do that for just now. Okay, so I've navigated in. I've now gone in, and I've got to this portion of the screen. I now need to gather these fields off the screen and store them in my object up here. I want to put them in my quotes array, right? So let's do that. Let's do that right here. So I'm on this screen because I've passed through these two things. And by the way, my debug over here has all the screens that I've navigated through, which is just these two up to this point. But I've got all the screens I navigated to. And it also told me my error message down here. Okay. So let's go back and let's gather those fields up. So I want to stuff these fields in response, .quotes, and I'm going to push them onto an array because I know that quotes is an array. So I'm going to say push, and I'm going to push an object onto the array. So that's why they're curly brackets. Now, what fields do we want? Well, I already said I want held. So I'm going to say shares held. And I get a field off the screen by, again, referencing the field name. I can say hv.getFieldValue held. Like that. Oop, got a semicolon. With that, I've retrieved this field off the screen. It's all it takes. And I want to do this for several other fields, so I'm just going to paste this in. That should be enough. So let's get the username, which is demo. So user 41. This is the part where we should be able to do the drag and drop. And we're going to call this user, or no, let's call it customer. Customer. And we want to get the company, which is comp41. We want to get the current share price, which is SHRNOW. And what else? We want one other thing. Surely we want one. Oh, total value. We want the total value, which is just value. All right. So with this, I've pushed this data onto my response, and it should automatically appear in my JSON output, right? Because I've already built that. So let's do a make on this and run it again. I'm putting it as XML. Send it in. And looky there. I got the number of shares held, customer, company, current price, total value. Just that simple. Very cool. But now I got to do this for everything, right? I got to do this for all the companies, or maybe not for all the companies, but how many ever companies the customer requests. If the customer says they want to see 1 and 2, those are what I'd want to return. Now, so I've got to know what the customer is requesting. So let's go up here and get a little bit more input. Input companies equals HB. Well, let's copy and paste. And companies is going to go into companies. All right, so now I've got companies, but now this is when a get value just returns a string, and I really want companies to be an array. So I'm going to do a split on the data that's passed in, and I'm going to split by comma. So this will create an array, and the companies will have to be passed in. The companies will look like this. Equals 1, 2, 3, 4. And with that, I'll be able to have an array of companies here. Okay. So now I have to pass in companies from now on. It's going to throw an error if I don't pass in companies from now on because it expects it, and I'm going to require it. So down here, I'm just going to put a loop in here. It says for var I equals 0. I is less than input.companies.length I plus plus, and I'll put my little loop around all of this, and of course I have to indent all of this. Okay, so with that, it's going to iterate over companies, and it's going to how many ever I pass in. But now I'm still hard-coded companies, so I've got to actually put a value in here that comes from my input. So I'm going to say input companies array sub I, and I'm going to convert it to a string because I want it to be a string. Oh, actually, it's a string already. Everything I'll pass in on a URL query string is automatically a string. So it is a string. Okay, so with that, I should navigate in, and I should be able to get the company, whatever one's passed in on input. But now what I'm failing to do is navigate back out. I navigate into the screen, but I have failed to back up to the previous screen where I put the company in. So before I do this, before I start back through the loop again to do the next company, I have to navigate back out again. And I do that just by doing an hb.run hb_aid equals pf3. Now I'm doing a pf3 because that's what it says here. pf3 exit, well, at this place, it exits out everything because I'm at the root. Let's go, oh, sorry, wrong key. But I'm on this screen, it returns back. pf12 exits from the entire application. pf3 will back up to the previous screen. So pf3 will get me back to this screen, but I got to hit pf3 again because I got to get to the previous screen. So with this, inside my loop, I'm navigating in, extracting out the data, and I'm navigating back out again. So let's do a make on this and see what happens. Okay, it's made successfully. Let's go over here to my test. Clear reset. I now have to pass in companies. If I don't, it's going to throw an error. Companies equals 1, 2. Let's not get too go too fast. Looky there. I have my 2 companies, KC Import Export and Glass Allergent 1 and 2. And it came out as XML. I can change this to be JSON. And I can do 1, 2, 3, 4, get all 4 of my companies, execute that, and now it is JSON. Now my test harness here doesn't do JSON very well, so I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to my test here and add companies to this, so I can see my JSON nicely formatted. There we go. I've just ran my transactions to be able to extract my data off those screens. Very, very cool. It was easy. I got my transaction count. I got my elapsed time. I have my input, so I echoed my input back to see what it is. Now, one thing I've not done, though, is I've not cleanly got out of my transaction. Let me take this out of Screen Max. I've not cleanly got out of my transaction. I backed out here to this screen right here, but I'm still on this screen, and I haven't deleted the HostBridge resources. So up here in Terminate, I want to add one more thing. I want to add, before I do my counts and my elapsed times, I want to go ahead and get out of my transaction completely. Now, a lot of times you could just delete the session and you don't have to be concerned about getting out. But sometimes, if you don't exit the transaction cleanly, you end up with TSQs or other things left behind, and you don't want that. And in my transaction, I can hit PF12 on any screen and get out. So I'm going to do that. And then I want to say, oh, and I also want to delete my session. So I'm going to say &HB delete session equals 1. And with that, my session is gone. So at this point, there are no resources occupied on the host. My transaction was executed cleanly. And let's make this. There we go. I go back over here, and I can run it again just to make sure that everything's okay. And it ran again. And now there are no sessions. And actually, you can see my transaction count went up by 1. It's 18 transactions. Okay. I just wrote a web service. That web service either produces XML or JSON. Simply by changing it, I could have done this with HTTP headers, and my input again could be posted in and could be XML or JSON or RESTful if I want to do get, put, delete, those types of HTTP methods and make them RESTful. All of that was my choice when I wrote my service. It's got debugging built into it, so that anytime I need to do a debug, I can simply turn debug on. And you can actually turn debugging on live in an environment too, specifically just for a single run. I know we're almost out of time, but over here, I have the ability to turn debugging on for a specific user ID or a specific web service when it's called. And I can do that in my production environment. So if a customer says, or if we get a help desk ticket that says, hey, I put in this account number and it blew out, I can actually have them reproduce that, and I can turn debugging on just for them for just that one run, and then I can retrieve this debugging information. And the debug's not on for everybody. It's not doing a lot of overhead. It's only on for that single execution, and I can retrieve and see everything that happened so I know what went wrong and why it went wrong.